Welcome. I'm Harmony Slater, your host of the Finding Harmony podcast. Over the past 20 years, I've taught thousands of yoga teachers and students to explore the intersection between ancient wisdom and modern everyday life, using mind-body practices to heal, awaken, and manifest their dreams from the inside out. This podcast is a sanctuary for those feeling overwhelmed by life's challenges. Are you ready to jump in and discover how these challenges aren't actually in the way, but are the way to finding harmony? Let's invite the magic back in. Hey, welcome today to our episode with Cindy Lusk, who is the author of Align and Refine, The Journey of Yoga and Meditation. It is a wonderful book that will help you deepen your understanding of the yoga philosophy and teachings and transform your practice. You know, many of us step on to the path of yoga seeking more fulfillment, but there's lots of contradictory messages out there. There's lots of different people telling you different things. And so Cindy draws upon decades of practice and study and presents a journey of yoga grounded in the authentic teachings that come from India. She uses her personal power of being able to synthesize these teachings in a systematic and accessible way, and also includes many exercises to help make them more applicable to you as a householder living in this modern world at this time in our history. And so today we're diving into a conversation with Cindy about her journey through yoga, where she came from, who her teachers were, and how she was inspired to write this beautiful book. So I think you'll love this episode. And of course, it's emphasizing the importance of aligning with our higher self, embodying the yoga teachings, bringing them into our everyday lives, and how this can help to support ourselves, our families, impact our societies, and create a better world at large. So I can't wait for you to hear this episode. It's a really beautiful conversation, and I think you'll really love Cindy, who is a part of our Ashtanga yoga community for many years, and seeing where she is now. Hi, welcome to the Finding Harmony podcast. I'm your host, Harmony, and I'm here with Russell K.
Good morning, Harmony. You're back from India.
Yes,
we're going to do another podcast. Who are we going to talk to today?
Yeah, so today our guest is Cindy Lusk. She is a PhD holder and has a new book called Align and Refine, The Journey of Yoga and Meditation.
I would love to write a book.
Get going, 15 minutes a day. Hi, Cindy. How are you?
I'm good. So I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you. And we had just started off. I said, so you've been practicing yoga for a really long time, and you're about to tell us about when you started practicing yoga.
Why would you do that?
Well, actually, my very first yoga class was in college at the University of California, Santa Cruz, from a wonderful Iyengar teacher named Ann Barros.
Oh, yeah.
And I think she actually was the lady, I deducted this, who was the retreat leader in Bali from Eat, Pray, Love.
Yeah, I recognize this name, actually.
I think she was the teacher because I know she used to do retreats in Bali all the time.
She
But
was
anyway,
the one.
college, trying a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And then when I moved to Boulder for graduate school, I started again with actually a student of Richard Freeman's who sent me to Richard. And that was in the mid-1980s. And it was actually before Richard was even doing Ashtanga yoga.
Oh, amazing.
This is interesting. I think you've alluded to something secret maybe you don't want to get into. I remember Richard telling me that his first yoga class was in the quad in Chicago, dropping acid and reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And I thought, oh, that's just what my first yoga class was like. And I'm wondering about your big tie-dye heart scarf in the background. I'm wondering if there was something maybe a similar story for you in college back at Santa Cruz.
Well, Santa Cruz, I mean, this was the late 1970s. So it was actually the hippie college at that time,
Mm-hmm.
which suited me just fine.
Yeah.
And maybe we should just leave it at that.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
should.
That's
Your
good.
parents might be listening to the show. We don't want them to.
What did you do your PhD in? And that was in Colorado then.
Yeah, that was in Colorado. In Santa Cruz, I hooked up with this wonderful teacher named Elliot Aronson, who's a social psychologist, a famous social psychologist. And I had had a lot of growing up. I grew up when busing was happening. There was a lot of racial tension and so forth. And I was very, very interested he really solidified my interest in race relations and prejudice reduction. And I pursued a PhD in social psychology here in Boulder because I wanted to solve racism.
How's it going?
It's getting better all the time.
You
Couldn't get
know,
worse, but it's getting better.
yeah, I know. I know. Well, I wrote a dissertation on how to change stereotypes, which basically came to the conclusion that it's very difficult to change stereotypes.
Yeah.
And that's when I was in grad school and started studying with Richard, is when I, of course, really, really got into yoga. And I came to the conclusion that maybe yoga would be a better way, that you had to work with changing people's hearts and minds rather than the academic route, which really wasn't working out for me so well.
Can I ask you, my present circumstances are not dissimilar from Meathead from All in the Family. It's very similar kind of situation on a Sunday night going over to Harmony's parents' house. It's really same blonde girl, same lunky Meathead in the same way. Archie Bunker sitting in his chair. My question to you is your lifestyle, and I can tell like by your hair and your scarf and your clothes that you embody the spirit of Santa Cruz. Were you in concert with your parents? Were you antagonistic towards them? Was there issues at home, like in conversations around Sunday dinner?
Not so much. I'm originally from West Virginia, so I come from a very different kind of lifestyle than I certainly lead now. But my father was actually probably the first person in his family to go to college, and he was an attorney. He became an attorney, and he was in the Air Force. So we traveled quite a bit, and we ended up in Syracuse, New York in the 1960s after coming back from England. And he really got into the counterculture a little bit there because that was right when all the war
Swinging.
protests were happening and all that.
Yeah.
So not so much. And then he passed away quite early in my life. But my mom did wonder, like about the second time I went to India, to my source, I think she actually asked me, "Are you in a cult?"
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we all got asked that question.
I certainly did, yeah. So there's a little bit of a scout from To Kill a Mockingbird about you. Like you have this kind of respectable, liberal-minded, legal father.
Yeah, more or less, I would say.
Yeah.
I would say, and then being in the military was very integrated, relatively speaking,
Yeah.
compared to the rest of the society. So,
Yeah.
you know, when we were in England, they put all the military kids in their own school, you know, rather than
Yeah.
going to the local schools to keep them on the program. And that was very integrated. And that's why it was a little bit of a shock when we landed back in Syracuse and busing was happening. And I was getting bussed in from student housing, and then there were these kind of inner city Black kids that are getting bussed into this kind of upper middle class Jewish neighborhood. So it was kind of and that's the first time I ever found out that there were Jewish people.
Yeah. It's just always a
So
shock. Yeah.
it was it was an interesting cultural milieu that I grew up in.
Yeah. Yeah, and
I think
very
that
different from what you had previously experienced
were you
traveling with
yes.
the military.
Yeah.
Was your family Southern Baptist, or was it maybe more not a big of a
Methodist.
presence? Methodist. Okay.
Methodist.
Okay.
Yeah, and my dad was actually a Sunday school teacher at one point.
Oh, cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
It primed you for the yoga world. It's so interesting that you said your kind of disillusionment a little bit with academia. I
Mhm.
remember feeling like that myself, not doing a PhD, but even just finishing up my undergrad degrees, a sense that I had already been practicing some yoga and going quite deep into it by that point. But this feeling like it was all in the mind, like it was just
Mhm.
playing a game in the
Mhm.
mind, and
Mhm.
everything was very theoretical in
Yeah,
university, and it wasn't
yeah.
actually like able to penetrate the world and people in the
Mhm.
world. And I really
Mhm.
wanted to transform the world and like work with
Right.
human beings, not just thinking about it.
Yeah,
And so it
yeah.
sounds like that was a similar kind of experience that you were
Yeah,
having.
well, when I started in Santa Cruz, um, I we were doing actually field research. So
Mm.
we were doing research in schools.
Oh,
We were
cool.
using cooperative learning techniques to put interracial groups where kids would interact around material to try and kind of break down the divisions between them and let them have a little experience of each other. When I got to Colorado, really, field research wasn't so much done. It was too hard, and it was actually hard to get into schools.
Hmm.
People didn't want all these liberals coming in and changing things around so much. And so
Mm.
you ended up doing these very minute laboratory experiments on college
Right.
sophomores. So I just got a vision of what academia would be like
Mm.
with having to publish and teach
Publish or perish is what.
and,
Yeah.
Yeah.
honestly, at that time, being a woman in academia wasn't looking very good to me.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There weren't very many.
another discrimination
Yes,
of sorts.
yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So I was happy to move over to the yoga. It took me a while to,
Mhm.
I actually got a job for quite a while. This was odd. I hooked up with some people and started studying judgment decision making. And we studied people like medical doctors and economists and weather forecasters. Boulder is a big mecca for weather forecasters. So I ended up working for the National Weather Service for a while, being kind of their token social scientist as they were modernizing. And it was
Amazing.
during that time, before they even hired me, I said, I would love to have this job, but I'm planning a trip to India for 2 months. Can I work for 6 months and then go to India for 2 months and then come back? And they said yes. So it served me very well. I was able to work, in that job for quite a while and 3 times go off to India to study
Wow.
for to Mysore, 2 months, 3 months, 3 months. Yeah.
Can I ask you how that got into your head that would be a good thing to do?
To go to Mysore?
To go to India the first time. Were you working with Richard at that point?
Yeah, yeah. Richard, I think he used to just teach in different venues that he would rent out. And then I actually think he started the yoga workshops so that he could host Patabi Joyce in 1989.
Yeah.
Patabi Joyce came to the States. I think that he hit three places: Mysore, Encinitas, and Hawaii. And so Patabi Joyce came to Boulder in 1989. He taught primary series here. And he said, "You come to India.
Mm.
You
Right.
come." And then dutifully, everyone trotted off the following year. And I actually, that time in 1989, went out to Encinitas as well. That's when I met Tim Miller.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Unless he might have come to Boulder, I can't remember.
Yeah.
And because they were doing intermediate series and advanced series in
Wow.
Encinitas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I got to sit in and watch advanced series. It was
In one of those
Tim.
racquetball
Yeah.
courts
No, I think it
with a
was like in a
video.
garage or something, right?
Well, there was a little studio in Solana Beach
Yeah.
that I think was where they were hosting
Hmm.
Amazing.
him. Yeah. So the people I remember is Tim Miller and Chuck Miller,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and
And Richard and
no,
Dom.
Richard didn't come out.
Oh, he didn't do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe Dom was there.
Dom probably.
Yes, Dominic. Yeah.
That's incredible.
That's why I went first time.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
was,
Because Pattabhi Joyce invited you.
Yeah.
yes, personally, along with everybody else.
We had a kind of fairly similar situation. Like we were interested in doing it, we liked doing it. And then you see him on tour and he says, come, and you get this idea in your head. It's, yeah, I
Mhm,
guess I should go. And then
mhm.
you end up going.
Yeah, and I went with my friends Teresa and Annie. You might know
Oh, Annie
Annie.
Annie
Pace?
Pace.
Yes,
Was that
that was
Annie's
her first.
first? That was her first time? Wow. I've spent a
Amazing.
lot of hours doing kirtan with Annie.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
wow. You went with Annie
So,
Pace on her first time. That's crazy.
yeah, and there were probably like 12 or 15 of us there in the
Yeah.
old
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
And there was the three of us from Colorado, the Americans, the three of us from Colorado, and then Tim was there,
Hmm.
Tim Miller, with
Yeah.
I think three of his students, and then everyone else was European and maybe some Australian people. I can't remember,
Like,
but it was very much smaller thing. It was very special because
Yeah.
Annie and Teresa and I were in the last group, so we came a little later. I think we could
Mhm.
start at 7 a.m. And we were the last people. We did our finishing poses there. And
Yeah.
Patabi Joyce, he would put us in headstand, and then he would go get coffee.
yeah,
And then as we were doing our finishing poses, he would go around and you would hear the vendors from the street, and he would go out and buy the jasmine and come in and replace all the jasmine on all his pictures on the wall
yeah.
and everything. Very
Beautiful.
sweet.
Oh,
It was very sweet.
I understand that you may have had as Richard calls it, a tragic accident. Did you also get your hamstring torn off your pelvis? I did. Mine
Yes.
came right off the
Sukhasana,
bone.
Padangusthasana.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
in
In fact,
Hanumanasana. I was
oh,
experimenting, tore
mm,
off the
but
bone. You had it
yours
done
was an
to you.
adjustment.
It was done to you. That's unfortunate.
Wow. In Mysore.
yeah,
In Mysore,
in my store.
it turns you off the practice, I imagine.
Well, I was very, very dedicated at that point. I was very much into it. And I didn't really know any better. We
Yeah.
were taught a little bit that it's part of the
Opening.
process. And yeah, exactly.
It's an
And
opening, yes.
it was crazy because it popped.
Yeah.
Everyone in the room could hear it.
Yeah, it's audible. It is an audible cracking sound
Yeah.
like a tree branch.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so the next day, Patabi Joyce self-doing.
Oh.
Self-doing. Oh my
It's
gosh.
it's funny because it happened to
You
Iyengar,
guys
didn't it?
heard I have something.
Iyengar was supposed to do a demonstration and had to do Hanumanasana. And this was told to me by a friend of mine who had learned the story in Pune. And Krishnamacharya had slammed him into Hanumanasana, and then it cracked, it broke right off, and then told him to do the other side so that it would be equal, and then
Mm,
cracked the other side. So both his hamstrings are ripped off.
mm,
And this is just some scar opening.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's
I'll tell you, I sustained a number of injuries, but that was the worst one in terms of
Mm.
longevity, in
hmm
terms of just being able to heal it and come back from it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mine's 28 years old and it's still there.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's how low I was too. But
No,
but
I mean it was 28 years ago that I had it and I
okay.
still have it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mine seems to have healed up, I will say.
I can't sit in a chair very long. I have
Oh,
to
boy.
I have to sit cross-legged or it hurts.
Yeah. Yeah, that's was what I was doing with in Mysore. I had to carry around a pillow to
Yeah.
ride in the to be able to
Yeah.
tolerate the rickshaw,
Yeah, I know that.
and
Oh
Know
my
that pain.
gosh. Yeah.
it's crazy, crazy. Yet I went back 2 more
You
times.
went back 2 more times after that.
Yeah, that was my first time.
Oh,
Wow.
so it didn't sour you the first time.
No.
No, mm-mm.
No.
Okay.
You
Yeah.
were in it.
You were in
I
it.
was definitely in it.
What?
It's a bit of an addictive practice in some
Yeah.
ways. And I come from a history of alcoholism in my family, and I think maybe it was a little bit of healthier addiction
Mhm.
than what
Yeah.
it could have been.
Yeah. What
But
what
yeah,
changed for you? You were practicing Ashtanga yoga for a like many years going to
Mhm.
Mysore, like when it was really hard to be in Mysore, you can get like a matcha latte
Yeah,
and
no,
Wow.
almond milk and all the things. Now it's a
pancake,
bit like California or Bali, but
Right.
very good croissants at Coquelin. Mm.
but you could only eat Indian food and you had to do the bucket bath and it was
Mhm.
the whole thing. It was like the
Oh
real
my
India
gosh.
Cold bath,
experience.
cold bath.
Yeah, the
Mhm.
cold bucket bath,
Yep.
exactly.
Yeah.
But what was it that kind of shifted for you, that changed in you or in your practice style, or what sort of drew you into, I think it was Anusara,
Honestly.
or practicing,
Mhm.
and then now maybe practicing even just your own style of yoga or
Yeah.
your kind of postures?
Mhm. Primarily the injuries.
Yeah.
My body just couldn't tolerate it. And Richard had a number of teachers come in to the studio, and one of them was John Friend.
Hmm.
And I really he actually helped me figure out how to do a back bend without being in pain.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And so that was pretty compelling to me.
Yeah, yeah,
And
especially if
also
every back bend you've ever done has been painful. The
yeah.
person who can relieve that pain, you're like, "Whoa."
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that and also I really resonated with the underlying philosophy, more tantric-based philosophy rather than something that felt more a little bit more classical yoga discipline,
Hmm.
Yeah. Interesting.
oriented. I also really, really appreciate the discipline I learned from Ashtanga after I got to Anusara because I felt like there was a little maybe lack of discipline. Yeah.
It's interesting. I don't know how much we want to go into this at all. There's a lot of other things that we can talk about, but when I first met Richard, I met him in England in 2005, I think. And he was right in the thick of his feelings about his relationship to John Friend. And it's kind of all
Mhm.
he could really talk about.
Mm, mhm.
And I
It's
would say
soured.
it soured. It definitely gave me that I'd never heard of him before I met Richard. But all he
Mhm.
was talking about was trying to manage and control this situation.
Mhm.
And I then met John Friend and hosted him in Taiwan two
Mhm.
years later. And I have to say that I'd been soured already
Mhm.
by the couple times I'd worked with Richard. And so I probably didn't give John my best face. And I probably
Mhm.
was a little bit of a turd to him, to be honest.
Mhm.
And so I didn't have a very good experience with him then, which is probably,
Mhm.
that's how bigotry and racism works, right? You set yourself up to discriminate. So,
Mhm.
what are your feelings about that? How you start out with Richard and then you go to John Friend, but then they maybe aren't getting along.
Um, One of the things that attracted me to John was he did teacher training,
Ah,
Hmm.
which Richard
yes.
wasn't doing teacher training at that point. And I taught at the yoga workshop for many years, but I needed some other work. So when I would try to interview in some other places, they asked me where I'd done my teacher training. This is
Hmm.
before there was a lot of teacher training around,
Right.
Yeah.
period. And when John offered a teacher training, I thought, okay, I can do this. And I kind of, at that time, I was also, I don't know, did you ever know Shankanarayana
Of
Joyce?
course.
Yep.
Shankanarayana?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, yeah, because Annie,
Annie, yeah. Annie and
yeah,
Guy
we started.
Donahue introduced me to them.
Right. So
Yeah.
we started studying with him in the 90s and so
Mhm.
forth. And so every time I went and studied with someone else, I checked it out with Richard. Like, when I came back after studying a lot with Shankar Narayana, I'd explain to him what the practices were and so forth. And so I felt like I had Richard's blessing with all of these things,
Mhm.
at least initially. And then there was a couple other people who also were studying with John who were teachers at the yoga workshop. So I think there was a very difficult time when there were several of us who were bringing the Anusara principles in to the Ashtanga sequence.
Mhm.
And there were some other issues that I never really understood, quite honestly. And so I can't really speak to them. But I think there was just a rub there that got too difficult.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Um, for me, I was feeling like, wow, I can teach Ashtanga and teach it in a way that so people aren't hurting themselves.
Mhm.
as much because the alignment principles were working for me, the Anusara principles. So I started teaching those, but I would always do this Ashtanga sequence. I kept
Mhm.
with the sequence pretty much, or loosely speaking.
Mhm.
And
You were teaching Ashtanga Sara.
there just came a point where it was just like we had to make a choice.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I chose to go with Anusara because that's what for a lot of reasons it was serving me a lot better. But it was very amicable in terms of my relationship and the other teachers who were involved with that's relationship with Richard. We
Mhm.
all hold him very dear. And then the Anusara thing had its whole falling apart as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
big time.
About
yeah,
2010, 2011, I think. It kind
something
of
like that.
exploded,
Yeah.
yeah.
At that point, I was uh, ready to step away to some
Yeah.
degree anyway. So it was kind of okay with me. And so, because I kind of love the blend in a way,
Mm.
I love the focus on the breath and an internal focus of the Ashtanga system,
Mhm.
and then the underlying tantric principles of the philosophy of Anusara, and honestly, better sequencing, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
How would you describe tantric principles?
Yeah.
I mean, there's all different flavors and varieties of Tantra. So, what I'm most familiar with is called Kashmir Shaivism. And what is a little bit different from it is that classical yoga is a dualist philosophy. There's Purusha and Prakriti, ne'er to meet, you know,
Yeah.
whereas with Tantra, everything it's non-dual and everything is a manifestation of the absolute consciousness, the divine, whatever you want to call it. Shiva
Yeah.
is what Kashmir Shaivism would call it, not surprisingly. So it has, for me, a more heartfelt quality rather than this feeling of having to control.
Mm.
It's more of a feeling of cooperating with the bigger energy. And that's why my book is called Align and Refine, because it's like aligning with the highest. You can think of that as your very own heart, because in this philosophy, who you are inside is the divine.
Mhm.
And so aligning with that rather than trying to somehow separate yourself from everything else, the world.
Yeah. I completely understand what you're saying. This sort of sense of, with the dualism, there is a sense of kind of separateness and also compartmentalism in a way, right? Where
Mhm,
something
mhm,
is consciousness and then everything else is matter. And
mhm,
and I think a lot of people, when they read the Yoga Sutras, they actually read it more with a Vedantic lens, or this
mhm,
lens of like all is one, all is consciousness, all is God. But the sutras themselves actually are dualistic in their underlying
mhm,
philosophy. And so then that creates a sense of separation almost, right? It like reinforces that pattern in our
mhm.
brains already. That's why the pattern's there, maybe.
Just
Yoga
Harmony and
Sutras would
I
say.
have always disagreed on this point, but go ahead.
You can't
You
disagree.
can.
Anyway, but that when you train your mind to see everything as one, or that it's all a part of a symbiotic, interconnected, or all God, all consciousness, there's less of a tendency to cut and divide, right?
Mhm, mhm.
It
Yeah.
sort of like helps to retrain the mind to stop creating these categories of good
Mhm,
and bad and right and wrong and black and white,
mhm,
and right, and living in this dualistic kind of
Oversimplified.
mindset. Yeah.
Of course, the Yoga Sutra does say that you go beyond
Yeah.
the dual,
Yeah.
the extremes, the opposites. That
Mm-hmm.
I think is exactly how they say it. The reality of the situation is that one of the great sages of the Kashmir Shaiva tradition is Abhinavagupta, and he wrote this amazing, really huge opus, the Tantra Loka, and in it he takes Patanjali on and just bashes him in many ways and says he's got it all wrong. But then he actually takes on a lot of those teachings.
Yeah.
And all they do is they expand them. They say, like classical yoga is based on the Sankhya tattvas, and Kashmir Shaivism or Tantra comes along and adds more tattvas at the top to describe these higher places, to describe the divine. There isn't a discounting of Patanjali altogether. Like so much of Indian philosophy, they absorb what works
Yeah.
and then they just shift it
Yeah.
and add to it and refine it.
Yeah. Indians are great at yes and.
Yes, exactly.
Yes,
Exactly.
and everything.
There are also great
Exactly.
stand-ups on the improv circuit. You see them in Chicago at Second City. The Vedanta masters really, they slay.
I'm not familiar with them.
Me neither.
You guys don't watch a lot of stand-up? I get
No.
Okay, never mind.
You know Zarna Garg? She's hilarious.
Zarna?
Is she the one that does the imitations of Donald Trump?
No, I don't think
Oh,
so.
that's a different one.
Yeah.
I'll look her up.
All right. You dive into Anusara and you're teaching Anusara and working with the tantric philosophy. And then Anusara falls apart at the root with John Friend and all of his many scandals that came to light. And you're now left on your own in a way. How is that? Because it's interesting that it's a reflection a little bit of the Ashtanga yoga world.
We're all a little out on our own right now.
Kind of. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know, unless you've really attached yourself to Sharat Joyce or Saraswati Joyce and you've taken on a new teacher within that family
But
lineage.
that's still a kind of balkanization.
Yeah, in a way, whether your teacher dies or whether there's a massive falling out or scandal or something happens, the community itself dissolves a little bit or fractures and moves.
Yeah,
And there was a
Anusara is still
scandal.
going as an organization, and there are definitely still Anusara teachers.
Yeah.
One of the blessings of my life has been having what I think are the best teachers in the world. Like I mentioned Elliot Aronson as a social psychologist, and I got Richard.
Yeah.
And Richard introduced me to John. John was brilliant. And John introduced me to Douglas Brooks, who I studied with for many years. And he also introduced me to Paul Muller-Ortega. And so I was already studying with Douglas for many years. He got me through some very difficult times in my life when my mom was very ill. And then when she passed away, I really started studying with Paul Muller-Ortega a lot. And he's a teacher of meditation and a tantric scholar. And so I was pretty heavily into that at the time Anusara disintegrated. So I had shifted my main emphasis toward meditation at that point. And this is something that I always thought it's very interesting, Ashtanga, they 8 limbs. Yet, when did you learn meditation?
Yeah.
Never. Yeah, not until you could sit down. And then
Yeah.
Yeah, Pattabhi Joyce would always say, you sit Padmasana 3 yama.
3 yama.
Yeah.
Which is like 3 hours. You have to sit in Padmasana before you can start to do meditation.
He said about Goenkaji's Vipassana, he said, why? This is crazy making. You were only thinking of your knee.
And then in Anusara, I think there was an assumption that people were meditating, but again, it was never really taught. So I had tried meditation with Shankaranayana, and his instruction was clear your mind.
You're like, clear your mind, clear
And
your mind.
Go.
And then I didn't really have I would come back after studying with him and I didn't really have any support system. So I got the sense that I was a bad meditator. And so when I, learned from Paul and started learning a lot more deeply what meditation was about and a mantra-based meditation that
it's
isn't
watching yourself be a bad meditator.
It's not a harsh control of the mind. It acknowledges that your mind might be active at times and so forth. That has been my focus in recent years.
Yeah.
And what led you to write a book?
Well, actually, again, Richard was so gracious in 1994, when I was in Mysore, I wrote him a letter. That was back when we wrote letters.
Yeah. No email.
I said, I think I'm ready to teach. I had been doing it for 9 years. And, I thought maybe I knew something about it.
Yeah.
And he was very sweet to embrace that and say, yes, of course. And then he was also very gracious in allowing me to start teaching yoga philosophy at his studio. And that was the start of it. And part of the thing when I was trying to make my way as in the early days was find your niche, and so
Even in the
mine was,
80s and 90s.
yes, exactly. And mine was yoga philosophy. So I began studying and kept studying, and that would be like invite students over to my living room and we would go through the texts and so forth. And it was a little bit the blind leading the blind in some cases. But that's how it works. And what happened was I also often was invited to people's yoga teacher training. I was like the philosophy person that came into yoga teacher trainings and did the 10 hours they were required to do or whatever. And I was doing this weekend in a teacher training once, and I saw myself outlining this book. I didn't know it at the time, but I did this whole diagram on a whiteboard, and it was just sort of like, oh, I think there's a book in that.
There's something
Yeah,
here.
yeah, and a lot of the reason why I wrote it is because I was so confused when I started. Like I couldn't understand what yoga's chitta vritti nirodha had to do with putting my foot behind my head. It was just sort of like there was this whole disconnect. And then, like the Bhagavad Gita says this, and the Yoga Sutra says this. And then when I started studying Tantra, I was like, oh my God. And so I put it together in my way and tried to write a book. It's very, very important for me to stay authentic to the teachings because I just feel like there's so many ways that these very profound teachings have been taken and made mundane. Even like the word mantra, people use it all the time inappropriately.
Yeah.
And so I really, really, it's important to me to stay authentic to the teachings, but to make them accessible. So I really tried to craft something that kind of started, from the highest perspective of the absolute consciousness and describes how we become manifest kind of mortal beings that with all our hangups and so forth, and then how the yoga works on us as beings to refine our beings so that we find our way back to our hearts. So when you get to a certain point in your life, like I'm in my 60s, so it's just sort of like this, if I'm going to put my work out there, better be soon.
Now's the time.
Yeah.
And how have you constructed the book? No, it's not like a David Swenson journal and handbook on how to do asanas.
No,
No.
it's really about meditation. It was very difficult to figure out how to structure it, quite honestly, because it's a chicken and an egg thing. And so I laid a lot of foundational principles. And one of them I'd like to share with you because it came up for me when I just listened to your most recent podcast on your 200th episode, which is very sweet.
Oh, God forbid.
It's very sweet
Mm.
to hear,
You got to hear Richard and Mary.
Yes, exactly. And hearing you, Harmony, talk about how there were all these different pieces and your journey of increased understanding from hearing all these diverse perspectives and so forth. So one of the foundational principles, and this is something again that I think is unique about the work of Abhinavagupta, is this concept of vikalpa samskara. And samskara means in that context different from the samskaras that were from classical yoga. Samskara means refine. That's where the refinement, align and refine, comes from. And so it's like refining a precious metal out of raw ore. And so the idea is that when we study, we refine our understanding over time. And so that's one of the points I make in the book is that when you study yoga philosophy, it's the same with many, many domains, but yoga philosophy, the first time you encounter a teaching, it's like, what? It's like, and then you get some level of understanding when you go back to it again, and then you consider it again, and your understanding just deepens and deepens and deepens as you move along the path.
Mhm.
And in part, the reason why is because you're changing. Like your consciousness is also getting refined as you're moving along in your practice. So the place into which you're placing a teaching in your awareness is a little bit more refined and open and intelligent and wise. So you're better able to understand the teaching because these teachings have so many levels.
Yeah.
And that's why, as you were saying earlier, Harmony, that the sutras are interpreted from many, many different perspectives.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Vikalpa being like the knowledge or the understanding
Or concept. Yeah.
concept. Yeah. So
Mhm.
refining of our understanding
But,
or concepts.
but it's also refining your awareness field.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that too. That imagery that you gave of sort of dropping like a coin of a
Mhm.
concept in a moving river that's always
Mhm.
changing
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
evolving, and how each time you dip into these texts, different things will land for you, or you'll have a different awareness or different understanding of them because your consciousness and your experience is always evolving and changing. And
Yes, yes.
yeah.
So I start the book by trying to lay down some of these foundational concepts, like that concept and the idea of just swadhyaya, like that studying is part of the path of yoga.
A pretty major part.
Yeah. Then I dive off the deep end into really the hardest part of the book to write was how to describe the highest consciousness, because I know you can lose people when you go
Yeah.
there, because so much of the yoga world really wants to disconnect itself from spirit,
Mm,
from just wants it to be a bodily practice
Mhm.
yeah.
and so forth. Yeah. And then I work through the tantric understanding of ignorance, really. It's not dissimilar from classical yoga, but they have particular mechanisms they posit about how when you embody as a human, you get covered over and it makes you feel small and less than and also different from everybody else,
Mhm.
and then how the practice of meditation works on you to overcome that and take you back to a recognition of yourself as divine. Yeah.
That's interesting. That's it reminds me of what you just described in the structure of your book is how Dante's Inferno is set up. It's very rich and very easy to grasp and understand kind of the physicality of the body in the Inferno. But when
Mm,
Dante writes the Paradiso, he really loses his ability to describe, as you said, the spirit or describe paradise or describe these higher states of consciousness. And there's nothing to hang on to. And so it is why
mhm,
people go to the asana, 'cause I can hold this. I can hold this toe. This
mhm,
makes sense.
mhm,
And yet meditation is this wonderful thing. Virgil is in Dante's Inferno. Meditation is this guide to lead us to
mm.
where we're looking to go.
It's
Yeah.
real. I have this kind of question or
Mhm.
observation,
Mhm.
being that I just came back from India, and we had one day in Calcutta and we went to the Ramakrishna ashram there,
I've never been there.
Nanda.
I'd love to go.
It's yeah, incredible. And also the um uh Ananda Swami, goodness.
Anandamayi.
No, not Ananda Maima. Autobiography of a Yogi.
Paramahamsa Yogananda.
Oh.
Paramahansa Yogananda, thank you. We went to I think it's the Divine Life Fellowship is his
Mhm,
organization there, and they have a beautiful ashram. And I was meditating a lot, like in these centers where
mm,
there's a lot of people who come and meditate daily, and it's all quiet and no one's speaking, and it's just beautiful. And it really reconnected me back to that meditative space. And it's like just
mhm,
infuse. I mean, there was no instruction, there was nothing, right? But it just
mhm,
infuses you with this awareness, and
mhm,
especially if you are experienced with meditation, you don't need much instruction. You can just sit, and if you're in a space that's really filled with that
mhm, mhm,
practice or that
mhm,
energy, you can tap into it and
mhm.
go. right away.
That's the beauty of being in the presence of great beings. That's why I think people resonate so much with Richard,
Yeah.
just
Because you,
presence and walking into that studio and so forth. And I know exactly what you're saying. The last time I went to India too long ago, pre-pandemic, I was able to spend a bit of time in Tiruvannamalai,
Oh, yeah.
and I went to sit in
Ramana
Ramana
Maharshi. Yeah.
meditation cave.
Oh,
I would walk up there every day and sit in his cave, and it was like, yeah, and this is why I shifted out of academia into yoga, because I feel like if each of us can become conduits for this higher energy, this higher consciousness, it'll ripple out,
yeah.
you know. We
Yeah.
can each have an impact in our own little ways, and that's part of, I think, what's happening in the yoga world. It used to be there were these mega gurus,
Yeah.
and I think it's really shifting into just smaller pockets
Mhm.
of little schools, and they're each doing their own thing, and each of those people are impacting a few people. I've thought about this a lot, and I used to think about it a lot more when I think about Richard's teacher, and then him
Yeah.
teaching me, and then me teaching that person. That person becomes a teacher, and then it's
Yeah.
it's amazing what impact you can have,
Yeah.
anybody, positive or negative. So hopefully, as yogis, we start bringing the positive back into the world, or at
Yeah.
least act as a counter force to some of the other. And that's where I end the book. Last chapter: change consciousness, change the world.
Amazing.
And that's not to say that we don't need to do all the things in the world on the surface of life
Yeah.
to address all the ills in the world. We definitely want to do that. It's not meant to be spiritual bypassing in any way, but I feel like, to the degree that more and more and more people are connected with their hearts, then you know it can't help but change those around them
Yeah.
and the whole vibrational field, as you were just describing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's so true. When you're really connected to the heart in that space, it's impossible to be violent or have hate. You can't even generate those feelings
Mhm.
because they're not a part of that space, right?
Mhm.
Because the other is you and you are the other, and you just can't generate that kind of hostility against
Mhm.
people.
Yeah, and that's what yoga is ultimately meant to help you realize,
Yeah.
is to connect. That's the connecting with that space within you. And here's where Tantra is a little bit different than some of the previous schools: is it's not only recognizing this within yourself, but then in further states of awareness to really have the embodied experience in the world of seeing other people as the divine,
Yeah.
and everything else is a divine, as you were just saying.
Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, right, that I'm in the heart of
Mhm.
all beings and all beings are in the heart of me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's really a very high state of consciousness, is what Krishna bestows upon Arjuna when he gives him Divya Chakshush. It's like,
Mhm.
all right, you want to see? I'll give it to you. And he gives him that divine sight.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
a little overwhelming for Arjuna.
Yeah. And then he's like, no, 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 get I want to go back.
It's a bit much.
Yeah.
Oh, it's beautiful. We are so excited and happy to share your book and your offering with all of our listeners. Where can
Mhm.
they get their own copy?
Well, in the usual places.
Yeah. On your website?
I have my website is cindylusk.com.
Mhm.
You could always request it from your local independent bookstore,
That would
and
be
you can
helpful.
ask them to stock it.
Yep.
That would be great. Otherwise, again, if you just Google it, you'll find it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I
Beautiful.
do have a discussion, I'm calling it a discussion circle, private
Yeah.
Facebook group, if anyone's interested in that. It's called Align and Refine. You
Yeah.
know, they can find that, and we're trying to look at a chapter a week, but you can join in anytime.
Yeah.
and join the conversation. And these conversations are so beautiful. I've enjoyed listening to your episodes. And it's fun. It's just fun to hear, to hook back into the community because
Yeah.
Ashtanga just is so dear to me. That the whole was such a formative thing for me. And as challenging as it was for my body, it really was very beneficial for me to have the experience of studying with Richard and many other Ashtanga teachers and to develop a dedication to the yoga, I guess is what I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's so much easier once you have that discipline established to move into other
Mhm.
practices and just bring that same kind of discipline with you, whether it's
Yeah.
pranayama or meditation. You already have this established habit
Mhm.
of tapping into yourself and this energy and the breath and
Right, and
sensation.
doing it regardless of how you feel on that
Yeah,
particular day.
yeah,
Yeah.
Showing up, doing the practice.
yeah,
You do.
totally. Yeah, you do. You take.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. It's been really wonderful to meet you, Cindy.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's been a real
likewise.
pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of the Finding Harmony podcast. I want to remind you of an incredible class that's open to you by donation. When you make a donation to Yoga Gives Back through my personal fundraising page, you will be invited to join my spiritual wellness workshop happening on June 16th. The recording will also be available. By participating, you're not only investing in your own spiritual growth, but you're also supporting an incredible charity, an incredible non-for-profit that I love and I truly believe in, Yoga Gives Back. It is dedicated to empowering women and supporting children in India through higher education and through microloans. And your donation isn't just a gesture, it is actually a lifeline for those in need. So mark your calendars, June 16th. Join me, find the link in my show notes, and come into a meaningful journey of yoga. Make your practice, your investment in yourself, fuel positive change around the world. Together, we can truly cultivate wellness, not only for ourselves, but for our whole world, especially for the women and the children, the young girls in India who need our support, who are being empowered by this money through education and microloans. Your donation is making a huge difference. I've seen it for myself and been so inspired to support and continue my support of this incredible non-for-profit organization. So reserve your spot now. Be a part of something bigger. And I just want to thank you for your generosity in advance. Come join Yoga Gives Back and join me in June supporting women, young girls, higher education, and women building businesses in India, which is incredible. I hope to see you there. That's it. We've concluded another episode of the Finding Harmony podcast. I just want to thank you so much for doing the work that changes the world, starting with yourself. It truly does make a huge difference. Please make sure you have your automatic downloads turned on wherever you listen so you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes. I have so much more magic I can't wait to share with you. Lastly, if you're on Instagram, I love connecting and hearing from you. So come on over and say hello at Finding Harmony Podcast. And you can also come say hello to me personally at Harmony Slater Official. Thank you again for being here. I cannot wait to share more with you in our next episode.